Hello MCU fans! Today we're going to be ordering 130 key flashbacks in the MCU timeline. Now I did a video on this a little over 3 months ago, and there's a couple reasons I'm doing this update. Number one, I've added 30 new flashbacks. They include Rocket's flashbacks from Guardians 3, Janet's from her time in the Quantum Realm and Quantum Mania, Nick Fury's in Secret Invasion, as well as several more that people asked me to add that I left out the first time. So that's great. But also, the original video, I was pretty sick. You could hear it in my voice, I sounded terrible, and I even misaligned the video so you couldn't read all the text. So yeah, it badly needed an update. But even if you watched that original video, I think you'll really like this one because again, 30 new flashbacks and they're all integrated in from the beginning of time to present day in the MCU. So without further ado, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Now, as I've been mentioning, during the month of August, I'm running a contest. All you have to do is be a subscriber and leave a comment. The more videos you comment on, the better your chance to win. And then in early September, I'll announce the winner, and they will be able to choose from one of these 3 books. So best of luck to everyone. Also, have to do the shout out, right, to the Marvel Cinematic Universe Wiki. Could not have done this video without it. If anything in this video is interesting to you and you want to research it further, this is the place to do it. Everything from this video and more can be found on the wiki. And then also, Drew, you know you're the man. Thank you so much. Couldn't have done it without you. Okay, so where do the flashbacks fall in the overall timeline? If you look at the fact that Captain America: The First Avenger is the first movie chronologically in the MCU, and of course Iron Man is the first movie released in the MCU, then where do the flashbacks fall within these 2 very important movies? Well, 37 are actually before The First Avenger, another 52 fall between the 2 movies, and 41 land in what I consider the modern age of the MCU. So it's pretty well dispersed. Again, going from the beginning of time all the way to present day. So, speaking of the beginning of time, Eternals has 2 very small yet critically important paragraphs. I'm actually going to break it into pieces to go over this. There's so much here. So it says, in the beginning, before the 6 singularities, we're going to come back to that word, and the dawn of creation came the Celestials. So we don't even have the Big Bang yet, and yet we have Celestials. So there have been theories that there have been multiple Big Bangs, that there's just a cycle, a Big Bang, and then everything contracts, and then we get another Big Bang, etc. And that the Celestials are remnants from the previous Big Bang. That could be, but of course, you know me, I'm going to ask, well, what happened the first time then? So there had to be a first time around, and it appears the Celestials were there even then. So I would love to know more about where they came from. I'm hoping the Timeline book goes into that lore, because I just think creation lore is so cool. But anyway, they're Celestials, we know that much. Also, we learned from Thor the Dark World that the Dark Elves came from darkness around this time. In a narration at the beginning, Odin says, long before the birth of light, there was darkness, and from that darkness came the Dark Elves. Later he goes on to explain, but before that dawn, and he's referring to the dawn of Asgard, but really the dawn of the entire universe, the dark forces, the Dark Elves, reigned absolute and unchallenged. So this really raised the question in my mind of where are they, right? I mean, we don't even have reality yet, or time, space, anything. The Celestials are there, and the Dark Elves too? What is going on? Well, the wiki theorizes that there is a plane of complete darkness and primordial void that existed before the Big Bang. And that plane is named, here we go, Janungagap. There you go. I'm going to go with that. Anyway, this is not stated in the movies anywhere. It's more from the comic book lore, but it kind of makes sense. Again, I really hope the Timeline book goes into this because I'd like it to be canonized, but that's where the wiki at least tries to explain where on earth these Dark Elves were. Okay, so we have the Dark Elves, we have the Celestials hanging out. Then, in Guardians number 1, the Collector explains, before creation itself, there were 6 singularities. So, Celestials, then Dark Elves, now these singularities. What on earth is a singularity? Honestly, I thought Marvel made the word up. I admit I'm not a scientist. But I did some research, and yes, according to space.com, these things do exist. Sorry, Collector, for covering up your head there, but the definition explains, the universal origin story, known as the Big Bang, postulates that 13.7 billion years ago, our universe emerged from a singularity, a point of infinite density and gravity, and that before this event, space and time did not exist, which means the Big Bang took place at no place, and no time. Wow. So all this is consistent, right? We don't yet have the Infinity Stones, so therefore we don't have space, we don't have time. All we have is celestials, dark elves, and these 6, in this case, singularities. Very cool. I mean, obviously Marvel is making up their own science fiction, but they do still base it on actual theories. So very, very cool. Okay. Also in Thor the Dark World, Odin mentions there are relics, and he's referring to the ether in this case, that predate the universe itself. So this is also consistent. They were in the form of singularities, but still, once again, another movie very consistent with this entire origin story. Okay, so then we go back to the Eternals, and then it explains Arishem, the prime celestial, created the first sun and brought light into the universe. So we're talking basically the Big Bang. Now I'm putting 13.8 billion because actually when you round the number up, it's more 13.8. So that's why I went with that. And that's what the wiki went with as well. But okay, so now we have the Big Bang. And there's Arishem doing the job. Nice work. We wouldn't be here if not for you, Arishem. Thank you very much. Okay, then back to the collector. He says, then the universe exploded into existence, and the remnants of these systems, referring to the singularities, were forged into concentrated ingots, infinity stones. Okay, that makes sense, right? The 6 singularities became the 6 infinity stones. Also in the Infinity War, we get a very consistent story. Wong explains, at the dawn of the universe, there was nothing. Then, boom, the Big Bang sent 6 elemental crystals hurtling across the virgin universe. Very cool. So again, these movies were produced, over years and years, and yet very consistent story. Love it. The story of the Infinity Stones has stayed very, very consistent. Okay. Then this is kind of interesting. This is almost a freebie, but in a behind the scenes for Ragnarok, we have the Grandmaster just kind of free associating, but he does explain something that is a long-held theory. He says, and even though I've lived since shortly after the Big Bang, then he says 14 million years old. He really meant to say billion. But nonetheless, what he's throwing out here, while not official canon, is a long-held theory that right after the creation of the Big Bang, basically the Grandmaster and Collector are born. We don't know how they're born, but elders of the universe, as they're often referred to, they came into existence. So, okay, we'll go with that. Again, I hope the Timeline book canonizes it, but sure. So now we suddenly have the Grandmaster and the Collector. Very cool. All right, then we go back to the last part, finally, of this Eternals little paragraph here, where it says, life began and thrived, all was in balance. Well, obviously, we can't have life if we don't have a solar system. So this is really describing how the solar system was created, and that is, according to scientists, 4.54 billion years ago, BC. It does kind of crack me up that we know what happened, 13.8 billion years ago and 4.5 billion years ago, yet we can't get our bus systems to run on time. You got to laugh, right? Nonetheless, that's what scientists are saying. That's what I'm going with. And likewise, that's what the wiki goes with. Okay, then we have the seed of Tiamat being planted on the earth 1 billion BC, or 1 billion years ago, because it says every billion years, new celestials must be born. And the planet Earth was chosen to host the celestial Tiamat. Well, if it's every billion years, then presumably 1 billion BC, right? Rounded. All right, great. Then also we learned from the Eternals that the Deviants were sent to allow intelligent life to grow because, as Arishem explains, every celestial host planet has its own predators. And I first sent the Deviants to exterminate them. But they became predators themselves. So presumably, soon after Tiamat was sent, then he would send the Deviants. So the 1 billion BC here is maybe not official, but it seems to make sense. That's what the wiki goes with. So it's a good time to place in the timeline. All right, this one's interesting. So now we go to Guardians Volume 2, when we learn when Ego was born. Now the wiki places it at 80 million BC. So we'll talk about why in a second, but it's really interesting. Ego says, the first thing I remember is flickering, adrift in the cosmos, utterly and entirely alone. Now, there are some interesting theories that Ego, which started as just a brain, as you can see, is the brain from nowhere. Wouldn't that be interesting? because all we learn about Nowhere is basically it's a headless, or it's a celestial's head that has no brain. It's been hollowed out and people are living inside it. Obviously, the Guardians are in it in Guardians 3. But there are some theories, maybe that's where Ego's brain came from. Very interesting. That would make sense, right? So I love that theory. Again, I hope it gets canonized. But okay, when did this happen? Well, Ego says, over millions of years, I learned to control the molecules around me. Okay, so we know it was at least millions of years ago. And then Star-Lord says, like how you made this whole planet. And he says, well, it might take you a few million years of practice. Basically, he was saying, eventually you'll be able to do this, but it took me some time. So we know it's several million at least. And then he says, over the millions and millions of years of my existence. So what the wiki kind of does is it says, okay, he didn't say hundreds of millions, but he did say millions and millions. So they're figuring it's over 10 million. It's less than 100 million. Ultimately, they came up with 80 million. So you can look on there and see all their research and how they did it. The bottom line on a lot of this is we're just trying to get it somewhere on the timeline. And hopefully the Marvel Timeline book will codify all of this and give us the exact dates. But yeah, it makes sense. It was quite a long time ago. So, okay, great. 80 million BC, we'll go with that. Likewise, the wiki says probably around that same time is when the information we learned in Guardians 1 from the Collector happened, which was the Celestials using the Infinity Stones. These carriers can use the stone to mow down entire civilizations. And a group was able to share the energy amongst themselves, but even they were quickly destroyed by it. Which, that's kind of cool, because this is kind of giving a hint to how the end of the first Guardians was going to end. Because remember, they were all holding hands as a group to use and wield the Power Stone. And the only reason they didn't die, of course, is because Star-Lord is half Celestial. So that's kind of cool. So again, we don't know for sure when this happened, but the wiki places it around the same time as Ego. Okay, then we're going to get to some more specific dates. This is pretty cool. So 2.5 million BC, the Vibranium meteor, or as we have learned in Wakanda Forever, meteors, landed on Earth. In Black Panther, the narration says, millions of years ago, a meteorite made of vibranium came to the Earth. Okay, so why 2.5 million? Well, there's a book, The Art of Wakanda, which is really amazing, very beautiful artwork, but it also includes some history in it. And it mentions that the vibranium collided with the Earth about 2.5 million years ago. Okay, again, we're just looking to place this on the timeline somewhere. This book isn't necessarily canon per se, but it gives us the date. Let's run with it. So 2.5 million BC. Great. All right, 28,000 BC, the 5 tribes settled in the land of Africa. So why are we saying that? Well, the narration continues in Black Panther, and when the time of man came, keep that in mind, when the time of man came, 5 tribes settled on it and called it Wakanda. So when did this happen? Those tribes lived in constant war with each other also. That's important to note. They're still at war with each other. So when did this happen? Well, wouldn't it make sense that the MCU wiki would turn to Wikipedia for potentially the answer? Notice this article talking about the evolution of human intelligence says that fully modern behavior, including figurative art, music, self-ornamentation, trade, burial rites, etc., is evident 30,000 years ago. Okay, well, Black Panther came out in 2018, so you just subtract 30,000, round it up, you get 28,000 BC. That makes sense. I like that. I mean, certainly Wakanda would have been, forming and having its tribes there when fully modern behavior was happening, right? Because we know Wakanda was very advanced. So, okay, again, this is just to get something on the timeline. That works for me. All right, this one's much more specific. 8,000 BC, that's when the first Black Panther arrives. So the narration continues. The warring tribes were fighting with each other, I said earlier, until a warrior shaman received a vision from the panther goddess Bast. The warrior became king and the first Black Panther. All right, where are we getting this from? Well, the same book also says that the first Black Panther was born 10,000 years ago. Again, the movie came out in, or timeline-wise, I should say, is 2016. I think it said 2018. Sorry, 2016. So subtract that. 10,000 years ago, you get 8,000 BC. And this one actually gets A little bit more substantiation because the Empower special on Disney Plus, which again, well worth watching. Notice it actually says the birth of Wakanda was 8,000, and there they're using BCE. A lot of people ask me why I was using BC versus BCE. We're going to see that in all of the Eternals references, they use BC. However, here they're using BCE, so you really can't win. And no matter what I use, somebody's going to say, hey, why didn't you use the other thing? But nonetheless, notice there they're using BCE, and more importantly, 8,000 BCE. All right, perfect. Then, here, case in point, there's BC. So I don't know. There's not consistency. Anyway, 5,000 BC, the Eternals arrive in Mesopotamia. And of course, they arrive to meet early modern day man, which is fascinating to think that now, finally, we're seeing some of the first modern man, right? That's where the Eternals are going to help them out. And yet, Wakanda's been around for thousands of years before that. So what did that mean? Did that mean the Wakandans were fighting off the Deviants? Or maybe the Deviants didn't even bother them. Maybe the Deviants didn't end up in Africa. I'd love to know that answer because it's just fascinating to think when you put all this together. See what I mean? By laying these flashbacks out, just kind of raises more questions and things about the lore that you want more answers to. Well, anyway, the Eternals, nice group shot, guys. They show up and even help by giving weapons to early humanity to help them, fend off the Deviants and protect themselves. Okay. Then we have this kind of funny one, 2988. That's very specific. Malekith observes the convergence, which remember in Thor the Dark World, that's when the 9 realms all converged with each other. Okay, so where do we get that? Well, Thor says every 5,000 years, the worlds align perfectly. So, timeline-wise, the movie's in 2013. You subtract that 5,000 years before, and you get 2988. Now, at first I thought it was off by 1, but that's because there's no 0. Darn Star Wars with its 0 BBY messed me up. But yeah, there's no 0, so actually it's 2988. But that's where they get that. Okay, great. Another really specific one, 2476. That's when the Dweller in Darkness attacks. So we learned from Shang-Chi that thousands of years ago, all of our people lived in peace and prosperity until the attack of the Dweller in Darkness. Together they pushed the Dweller and his army into the Dark Gate and locked it behind them. And then our people have been here for over 4,000 years. Okay, so it's over 4,000, but they didn't say 5,000, right? So the wiki splits it down the middle at 4,500 and subtracts that from when the movie occurs in 2024, and you get 2476 BC. Wild. Okay, great. So that's when that all started. And then they said, so they're preparing them for what we hope will never happen, which of course in 2024 does happen. So yeah, 2476 is when they lock the Dweller in Darkness away, and of course 2024 is when the Dweller calls on Wenwu to try to trick him into opening the portal. Okay, another pretty specific date. So 659 BC. Odin and Hela subjugate the 9 realms. This is from Thor Ragnarok when we learn from the mural about this event in the past. Where on earth did they get 659 BC? Well, a couple things. Number one, this has to be way before Thor was born and most of the modern-day Asgardians, because no one remembered her, right? I mean, they were all like, who are you? So it has to be way, way in the past. All right, but still, how do we place this? Well, Kate Blanchett actually gave us maybe a little bit of help when she said, I think if you were locked under the Asgardian stairs for 5,000 years, you'd be a little cross. Okay, well, we could say that she nailed it. It's 5,000 years from present day, right? Well, not necessarily, because in Thor the Dark World, Odin mentions we're not gods. We're born, we live, we die. And just as humans do, he says. And then Loki jumps in with, give or take, 5,000 years. So he's basically implying the average Asgardian's life is 5,000 years. So it's very unlikely, therefore, Hela was actually locked away for 5,000 years, since that's about the most they live. So what the wiki does is it says, okay, we need to convert average human life into average Asgardian life to get the ratio. Kind of like you do dog years, right? We give dogs a human age because we figure out the ratio between the average dog's life and the average human's life. So if you do that, and then you look at Hela's age, or I should say Cate Blanchett's age, she was 47 when this movie was filmed. So if you figure out what the average age of an Asgardian would be relative to the human age of 47, and subtract that from when Thor Ragnarok came out, you get 659 BC. I love it. Very clever, right? The wiki really works hard to try to come up with something logical. Is it perfect? No. But at least they tell you why. So, okay, I'll buy that. So the key is changing human years into Asgardian years and then looking at the age of the actress in the movie, Cate Blanchett, to figure out how long ago it was. All right, there we go. Okay, thank goodness this one is not as hard. They give us the date, 575 BC, Babylon. That's the Battle of Babylon that was seen in the Eternals. And it's also very important, this is when Ajak expresses her doubt about their mission. She learns about their mission at this point. There's little itty bitty Ajak down there talking to Arishem. All right, then we jump to 5 BC. So we're almost finally into AD, so we won't need the BC anymore. That's the beginning of the Kree-Skrull War. Why do I say that? Well, there's a deleted scene in Captain Marvel, which is a bummer. I wish they wouldn't delete scenes that actually have timeline stuff. So I don't even know if it's canon, but again, we're just trying to get a date. So Jan Rog asks the students, how long has the Kree-Skrull War been going on? And they answer, thousands of years. And he says, yes, thousands of years. So it's more than 1,000. We're just going to go with 2,000 to get something out there. Could be longer. But if you take 2,000 from 1995 present day and subtract it, you get 5 BC. Okay, great. We'll go with 5 BC. Bottom line, the Kree-Skrull War has been going on for a long time. All right, finally we move into AD, and I'm not going to put AD every time because that's just going to be assumed. So the BC is whenever it was BC. Everything else is assumed to be AD. All right, we have the Gupta Empire. And Sersi and Ikaris are married at this time. So that's very important. And there they are getting married. So sweet. And then, now, we have the Valkyries battling Hela and being massacred. So if you remember in the story, in Ragnarok, Hela escapes. So she's been in captivity for quite a while now. Pretty ticked off. She escapes, and the Valkyries have to come in to help. Because Valkyrie is explaining when she tried to escape her banishment, he, Odin, sent in the Valkyrie, to fight her back. Okay, so when does this happen? Well, it has to be before Thor, because Thor thought they were all gone when he was born. He thought they were all gone. So obviously they can't be around, so this has to be before Thor was born. So we know that. And then once again, they look at the average age of a human, the average age of an Asgardian, the age of Valkyrie, the actress there in this scene, and try to backdate it. And that's where they come up with 950. Okay, great. But the most important thing is it's before Thor was born. Okay, then, thank goodness, we have a specific date, 965. Notice they say AD again. That's when Odin battles the Frost Giants. The battle started in Norway, and then the battle ends up going all the way to the Jotunheim, and Laufey gets killed. Eventually, in the movie, gets killed, I should say. And then, this is kind of fun. We can tie a few things together. In Eternals, Gilgamesh says, yours is a secret brew Odin taught me as a thank you after we helped defeat Laufey's army in Tonsberg. So that's kind of cool. When the part of the battle happened on Earth, the Eternals were helping. Okay, great. So, 965, they tell us the date. That's perfect. Also, we know Odin found young Loki and adopted him at this time. So we know Odin or Loki is basically, 0 or a couple months old. Also, then we can place this flashback from Love and Thunder, where Frigga is carrying baby Thor into battle. Look at this sweet little baby Thor. He's about 1 year old, maybe here, 1.5, because they're about the same age. Loki and Thor are within a year of each other. But I love this. It says baby Thor is cooing. So he's cooing, and look at little pouty Loki. Loki pouting, Thor cooing. Pouting, cooing. It just perfectly personifies their two personalities, right? But okay, hold on to this thought about Thor, because you may already be saying, how can Thor only be 1 year old in 965? I thought he was older than that. Hold on to that thought. We're going to get to that. Okay, so in Love and Thunder, we see several scenes of Thor running. The way that the wiki dated this is by looking at how old the actor, in this case Hemsworth's son, was in the scene. So this puts it in 971. Then, same thing, by looking at the ages of the actors in the scene, this scene is being placed in 975. Well, here's what's interesting. Clearly, and this is, by the way, when Odin is recounting the Battle of Jotunheim to both Thor and Loki. Notice their ages. They look very similar in age, right? Okay, so what do we do then with this statement? In Infinity War, Thor says, I'm 1,500 years old. Okay, well, if he's 1,500 years old in 2018, which is when Ragnarok happens in the timeline, that would be way before 975 AD. Yet, we know Loki and Thor are around the same age. So I don't know if this line was right. I don't know what to do with this. It feels like they retconned this, and he's not 1,500 years. Maybe he was rounding up. But, and again, in Ragnarok, Thor mentions there's a point when Loki plays a little trick on him and turns into a snake and then bites him. But notice he says, we were 8 at the time. Well, again, they're around the same age then, right? I mean, within a year of each other. So, okay, I think the 1500s got to be wrong. There's no way that Thor is 700 some years older than Loki if they were both kids at the same time. All right, anyway, whatever. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I just think they kind of made a mistake on that 1500 because it's not consistent with what we hear in all the other movies. Okay. Then one more scene of Thor running that's pretty easy to place, once again by looking at the age of the actor in the scene, teenage Thor running in 983. There's some more scenes of him running and things. Those are next to impossible to place. The wiki places them, which is great, but even it admits it just kind of sporadically puts them later in time. So I'm not going to include all of those, but these were really easy to place because he was a teenager, etc. And by the way, the theory with Asgardians is once they reach maturity, so, probably after their teen years, that's when they start growing slower. Because notice up to this time, we pretty much just been going year by year by year. They grow at the same rate as humans. But the way the wiki theorizes is once they hit maturity, then their aging goes for thousands of years. So, very interesting. Okay, then we have the Kree and Nova Empire War. So they're already fighting with the Skrulls for 1,000 years and before this. Now they're fighting with the Kree, or with the Nova. So when did that happen? Well, we learned from Ronan that 1,000 years of war between us will not be forgotten. And that's from the first Guardians movie. Okay, it came out in 2014 from the timeline standpoint. 1014 it is. So man, these guys pick a fight with everybody. All right, 1015, Wenwu discovers the 10 rings. Why 1015? All right, so first of all, the legend of the 10 rings has been told for thousands of years. So the rings have been around for a long time. But how long has Wu had them? But at its center, there is always one man. He chased money and power for 1,000 years. Okay, great. Seems like we have our answer. Then also we learn at the end of Shang-Chi, how long did your dad have them before he gave them to you? And Shang-Chi says about 1,000 years. So the movie happens in the timeline in 2024. 1,000 years before that, you would think then would be 1025, right? Or 1024. No, because there was a period of time, if you remember, when Wenwu stopped using the rings. He set them aside to be with his wife and, of course, had both Shang-Chi and Xialing. So that's why the wiki says it's actually a little bit longer than 1,000 years from 2024. Makes sense. Again, all just guesses, but I really like their logic. Okay, then we have 1409. That's when Odin hides the Tesseract in Tonsberg, Norway. He loves Norway, doesn't he? The Red Skull, as explained in the Tesseract, was the jewel of Odin's treasure room. And of course, he laid it there in Norway. When did this happen? Well, this is the first time I'm bringing this up, but I will mention this a few times. There's this really cool timeline that Marvel released around the time of Avengers that harmonized all the movies up to this point. And in particular, I did a little blowout here that shows when Odin leaves the Tesseract on Earth. And it is 600 years BIM. Now, BIM is before Iron Man, before I am Iron Man, basically, when Stark declares that. So in Marvel's mind, that's the 0 point of the MCU. And I would agree. That's about the most important thing that happened in the MCU. So 600 years before that statement would be 1409. Okay, great. So that's how we're able to place that. Perfect. All right. Then we have the Eternals eliminating the Deviants. In 1521 AD, they finally wipe them out and no more Deviants. Great. And also, Athena experiences the Mad Weary. That's very important. And the Eternals part ways. So from 1521 on, the Eternals are off doing their own things. Then we learn in 1571, Namor is born, or Namor. And they tell us that. So that's easy. And there he is, being born, cute little guy. And then also we have at least an approximation of when we think Namor buries his mother. The movie doesn't tell us when this flashback is happening, but the script does. Okay, we'll go with the script because, again, we're just trying to get something in the timeline, and this makes sense. So 1631 AD. All right, then we have 1693. Agatha Harkness is put on trial back in the Salem, Massachusetts witch trials. And, of course, started out poorly for her, and then she absorbed all the energy from all the other witches and wiped them out. So it'll be interesting to see if the Covenant Chaos show actually gives us more around this time frame. I hope so we learn more of the past. But yeah, 1693. Okay, then we have, now we're finally jumping all the way to 1936, as Steve's mother dies and Bucky expresses his friendship with the infamous, "I'm with you to the end of the line, pal." That was just a few years before the Captain America movie. So we're almost to the Captain America movie. All right, then in fact, right before the Captain America movie, Johann Schmidt is injected with the super soldier serum. That's a flashback from the first Avenger. It was right before it, so happening in 1940. Now, I'm not going to go into the movies themselves. In fact, that will be my next video. Watch for that one soon, where I go through the entire timeline for the movies. But in this case, we know Captain America First Avenger started around this time, but we're sticking with just the flashbacks. So the next flashback is in 1942. Aisha and the clandestines find the bangle, and of course you can see the 10 ring symbols down there. Pretty cool. Why do we know it's 1942? Well, they don't tell us in the Miss Marvel show, but we're able to figure it out because notice what Aisha is wearing, her clothing there. Then they give us a flashback later in the series when Aisha is fleeing British troops soon after finding the bangle. And they do tell us that is in 1942. And notice what she's wearing. Basically the same clothing. So presumably this is right after they found the bangle and they're all taken off and running, right? And then, of course, that's when she meets up with Hassan. And he's giving his speech. If we have to fight, we will fight. We have given our blood to this land for thousands of years. So the two of them meet in 1942, again, right after the bangle was found. Okay, then we jump to 1944, when Aisha, who's now pregnant, is walking with Hassan. We can date this because we know how old Sana, her child, who of course was going to be Kamala's grandmother, we know how old she is during that big important time with the lights. So she gets on the train. She's 3 at that point. So we can backdate this to 1944 when Aisha's pregnant with her. Okay, then we take a little stop with Bucky Barnes. Bucky at this point, now the Captain America movie has ended, and Bucky, remember, fell off the train into the ice. He is located by Soviet armed forces. Winter Soldier gives us this flashback where we see them collecting him, presumably soon after he fell off the train. Of course, he was probably frozen in the ice a little bit too. But anyway, they take him into captivity in Russia. All right, then we have in 1945, Phastos mourns his impact on the world. That's from the Eternals, as he's thinking about the fact, this is my fault, I did this. There he is, I did this. So, taking responsibility for it. All right, then we also have Operation Paperclip beginning. This is when a lot of the German scientists were then, after the war, were recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D., ultimately, many places, but S.H.I.E.L.D. in particular, and that's how Hydra started infiltrating. We learned that in The Winter Soldier during the flashbacks. So Operation Paperclip was in 1945. In fact, here's Black Widow explaining it was Operation Paperclip after World War II. S.H.I.E.L.D. recruited German scientists with strategic value. So, okay, great. That happened in 1945. Then now we see little Sana being born, less than a year, obviously. So that can be dated to 1945, another flashback in Miss Marvel. And then we jump to 1947 when Najma finally locates Aisha. Started off okay and then turned sour. Obviously with Aisha dying and poor little Sana almost not surviving. But we know also it's 1947 because they give us those dates. In fact, particularly August 15th of 1947 when Kamala travels back to the partition of India. I think I've said before, I don't really like closed-loop time travel, but I do really like the history they gave us about the partition. So I just let the closed-loop time travel go. To me, it violates the Endgame rules, but I'm not getting into that. It was really cool, and I love the history. So yeah, again, now Kamala ends up being the one to save her grandmother with the lights, so her grandmother is reunited with Hassan. So very cool, very cool. Okay, now we jump to 1950. This is when Arnim Zola, who's now part of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though he's still Hydra, he starts experimenting on the Winter Soldier, saying, you are to be the new fist of Hydra. We know it has to be around this time, and I'm going to go into why, because this is really cool. This is one of the reasons putting all the flashbacks together is really cool. Because we learn in Falcon and the Winter Soldier that it's around this time Isaiah Bradley is being experimented on. And it kind of makes sense, right? In Russia, they're using super soldier serum on Bucky, and in America, they're using super soldier serum on Isaiah Bradley. So a lot of experimentation going on. So why 1950 here? Well, Isaiah says a handful of us got shot up with different versions of that serum. And then Bucky's saying we had a skirmish during the Korean War. And the Korean War was, starting around the 1950 timeframe. And he even says we met in 51. So Isaiah Bradley was experimented on in 1950, and then isn't it wild? Bucky and Isaiah, both of whom were being experimented, different parts of the country, but around the same time, end up fighting each other in 1951. And of course, Isaiah says, if by met, you mean I kicked your butt. But yeah, isn't that cool? When you put all this stuff together, it just fits. It all just fits. Very, very neat. Okay, then we have from Captain America the Winter Soldier, this little interview with Peggy Carter, which would be dated around 1953. You don't learn a lot from it, but it's just kind of cool to see her again in a video. Then we jump all the way to 1970. So now, arguably, this is not a flashback. I want to be clear. But in a way, it is, because it gives us a lot of insight into what happened in 1970 in the MCU. What I'm referring to is the time heist in Endgame when they go back to 1970. Now, I firmly believe it created a branch, so the events, therefore, that happened didn't happen in our main timeline. However, the things we learn about 1970, because it was a branch off the main timeline, those are all things from the main MCU. So we see Howard Stark, right? And we get an excellent Zola reference. So obviously Zola is still tinkering around at this point. He says, you looking for Dr. Zola? Have you seen him? Or he's looking for Dr. Zola. Have you seen him? So anyway, we meet Howard Stark. We know what he looked like around the 1970 timeframe. We also see Hank Pym, a very young Hank Pym. And we see a very early Ant-Man prototype suit. Basically from the comics. That's the original comic version of the suit. We also get a potential Captain Britain mentioned when Peggy Carter says, or someone says to Peggy Carter, they're trying, ma'am, but Braddock's unit, and he's talking about Brian Braddock, who theoretically might be Captain Britain. We'll see if they ever go that route, but definitely a good Easter egg for that. More importantly, though, we get to see Peggy Carter, right? So we now know what she looks like in this time frame, and it's confirmed, once again, that she is still the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. So that's very cool, okay? And we learn it's, from a timing standpoint, it's before Tony's May 29th birthday, because they pretty much canonize his birthday in late May because of Fury's big week happening, and remember, he has his birthday during that time frame. But yeah, Howard Stark is saying, how far along is she? I don't know. What a surprise that he wouldn't know, right? And finally, we also meet Howard's longtime butler, Jarvis. So, wow, there was a lot from this, which again, I believe is canon to the main MCU because it's a branch off the main MCU. So at least the things we learned are canon. The conversations, no, they happened in a branch. But the things we learned, yes. Very cool. Okay, And then we jump to 1971, and now we see a lot of flashbacks from Carol Danvers' early life. Once again, how do they figure these out? They look at the age of the actress in the scene, and then the age of Carol Danvers when we meet her in the Captain Marvel movie, and subtract it, and you get 1971. Very cool. So young Carol Danvers looking up at the stars with her brother. Then after that, we get the same actress, being Carol, getting up after a tumble on the beach. Then we jump to 1973 with Howard Stark filming the promo for the 1974 Stark Expo, which of course Tony watched to learn how to cure the palladium poisoning he was having. So there he is again, watching the movie. All right, then we jump to 1978, slightly older Carol Danvers getting up after a bicycle crash. Also, Carol Danvers getting injured in go-kart racing. She gets injured a lot, poor thing. But that was a really cool scene in the movie, though, when all of these times when she was injured, she gets up and gets her determination to fight back. So very cool. Here we see again, she's playing baseball after stumbling during a pitch. Then we jump to 1978 with Ego and Meredith falling in love. Now, he mentions that he visited her several times. So the wiki kind of assumes that they first met a couple years before they, finally consummated their love. Which, speaking of, the wiki says in 1980, that's when Peter Quill is conceived. So why 1980? Well, you might remember we see a flashback where Ego and Meredith spend some time together. They tell us it's 1980, and then you never really know with James Gunn's tweets whether to trust him, but at least when referring to the Guardians movies, he's pretty accurate. And here he says, I can't believe how many people have asked me this. Guys, a pregnancy is only 9 months, and she could already be pregnant at the start of 2, meaning Guardians 2. He's correct. She has to be pregnant at this point. She's just not very pregnant, but she's already pregnant. And we're going to see why that all matters when we see a little bit more about Peter's age. But yeah, this is very cool. He's basically specifying they're pregnant at this point. And probably she's only about 8 weeks pregnant, because when you see her in these scenes, yeah, she doesn't look super pregnant. Okay, then we jump to 1984, where an even older Carol takes part in U.S. Air Force training exercises. Then we jump to 1987, which we know it's 87 because notice Hank says it was 1987. But this is when Hank and Janet have their ill-fated mission, and Janet, of course, ends up getting trapped in the quantum realm. So I love the de-aging. We actually get this from Ant-Man and the Wasp, where they show us what she looked like at that time. Fantastic de-aging on her. And of course, this is the ill-fated mission, right? This is when Janet ends up getting trapped into the quantum realm. All right, then this flashback, boy, it's a blink and you'll miss it, but it's from Guardians 2, right before Ego and Peter have their final battle together. He has some flashbacks to his early life. And this is young Peter Quill with Meredith spending some time together. It's just kind of cool that we actually got to see them happy, before she got her cancer. Okay, so then 1988. That's when we know Peter Quill is taken from Earth. And, there's a spaceship, Yondu's spaceship, capturing him and taking him away. And, boy, so tragic, right? He had just left his mom, didn't want to be near her as she was dying, and yet now, when he's being taken away, the first words off his lips are Mom. Wow. Okay, so how do we know all these dates were correct? Well, in Guardians 3, they confirm it. I was 8 years old when I left Earth, okay? He says to Nebula. So that means he was 8 in 1988, and that's how you can backdate to when Meredith was pregnant in 1980. So kudos to James Gunn. He knows his characters. This was perfect chronology. Loved it. It all worked out really, really well. Nicely done. Okay, so then we go to 1989. 2 years after Janet was lost, obviously on that mission, and Hank Pym resigns from S.H.I.E.L.D. And we see Howard Stark, what he looked like in 89. So, 19 years after we saw him earlier. And we see a de-aged Hank Pym and an aged-up Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter. So, pretty cool. De-aged and aged up in the same scene. Love it. All right, so that's 1989. Also in 1989 is when Carol Danvers absorbs the Tesseract energy in that accident. So this is a flashback from the Captain Marvel movie. And there she is getting all the energy from the Tesseract. So how do we know when this happens? Well, in the movie, multiple times, they mention it was 6 years ago, 1989. So that makes it pretty easy. Also, in the deleted scenes, they even mention 6 years ago, we sent you to locate Marvel and her energy core. So in the movie itself, as well as in the deleted scenes, they really canonized this was 6 years earlier. All right, so then we have 1989. So this is just a year after Yondu captured Peter. Yondu's teaching him to use a blaster. So you can tell by looking at the actor's age in the movie when this flashback is. And by the way, this is also during Guardians Volume 2 when Peter's having all the flashbacks to his life. So this is really cool because he's teaching him to use the blaster here. And then it's in 1989 Christmas time that Peter Quill gets his blasters. So that's pretty cool. That works out really, really well. And there he is with his blasters. So yeah, just this chronology with Peter Quill's age is fantastic. All right, so then we jump to 1991, when Howard and Maria Stark are killed. Maybe one of the most important events in the MCU. Had such an impact on so many different things. Okay, so where do we get this? Well, number one, we eventually learn it was the Winter Soldier that killed Howard Stark, right? Tragic scene. We also get, by the way, flashbacks in Civil War to this moment where Howard and Maria are leaving because Tony is using the barf technology to relive this moment in his life. So very sad. But again, it shows how important this was, how it shaped him and shaped so many different things in the MCU. And of course, here's the Winter Soldier killing both Howard Stark and eventually killing Maria as well. So this was actually mentioned even as far back as Iron Man 1 in a quick newspaper article where it gives the exact date, December 17th, 1991. And yet another actor playing Howard Stark, so at least 3 actors have played him over the years. Pretty crazy. But yeah, very, very important date mentioned in so many different movies and flashbacks. All right, so then after Howard and Maria are killed, obviously, Stane is appointed CEO of Stark Industries. We learn that from Iron Man. And then we learn very soon after, Tony is appointed CEO. And poor Stane has been kind of upset ever since. But again, we learn that from Iron Man. In 1992, in Black Panther, they really clearly tell us the date. That's when T'Chaka confronts N'Jabu regarding Ulysses' claw. And of course, the encounter goes really poorly, ends up in N'Jabu dying, leaving Killmonger an orphan. And of course, that's when he decides to get his revenge eventually. So 1992 is when this flashback occurs. 1995, that's when Thanos wipes out half of Gamora's homeworld. So how do we know this? Why did the wiki pick this date? Well, we learn in Infinity War when Gamora says, Thanos says, you told me that too every day for almost 20 years. Basically, she said, I hate you. I hate you. So you could go, okay, 20 years from Infinity War, which is in 2018. Then we get what? Well, why is it 1995, right? Remember, Gamora left his side in Guardians 1, which is in 2014. So it's really almost 20 years from 2014. So almost 20, now you get the 1995. So really cool. I love how the wiki doesn't just take a quick answer, because I'd have taken 2018 and subtracted 20 years. Nope, that wouldn't be right. So anyway, love it. Nice job, wiki, as always. Okay, also in 1995, you have Natasha and Yelena being sent to the Red Room, and they tell us clearly 1995. So tragic. You have their escape in the airplane and then being sent off to the Red Room. I've always thought they should have been a little more upset with a Red Guardian for sending them away, their fake parents, but they had no choice. They'd have been killed otherwise. So I don't know. Didn't have a choice, but so tragic, so hard to watch. That opening scene from Black Widow is really rough. Okay, so 1995, that is when Ava, a ghost's parents are killed. So how do they figure this out? Okay, well, they look at the age of the actress in this scene and the age of the actress playing Ghost in present day, subtract the difference, and then subtract that from present day in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Hope that made sense. That's very, very clever. So again, they look at these ages of the actresses in the movie and use that to try to get the difference in time. Very, very clever. So 1995 is when they were killed. 1996 is when Wenwu meets Ying Li, because they tell us that. And remember, this is when I was saying he takes off the 10 rings to be with her for a while, and that's why that 1,000 years was a little more than 1,000 years that we mentioned earlier. All right, so there they are doing the dance together. That was so cool. Such a great movie. All right, 1996. That's when Mark Spector's brother Randall drowns in a cave. How do we get that date? Well, we don't necessarily get it yet, but we're going to get it in a second. Because in 1997, which they make more clear, Mark's mother refuses to attend his 10th birthday. So we're able to therefore backtrack and get to the 1996 to place this date as well. So his mother refuses to attend his 10th birthday in 1997, which, man, she was evil. She might be one of the biggest villains in the MCU, really. When you think about the impact she had on poor Mark, creating his multiple personality syndrome, the DIDS. Boy, painful, just painful. All right, so 1997, now we're at Secret Invasion, where this fits in the timeline. That's when Fury strikes the deal with the Skrulls. If you remember, he said, while you work to keep my home safe, Carol Danvers and I will find you a new one. Of course, we know they failed to do that, but this deal was struck in 1997, so that's where it's fitting in the overall timeline. All right, then Secret Invasion also jumps to 1998, and that's when we learn that not only were the Skrulls off the books, but also Vara and Fury's relationship was off the books. Because they tell us 1998, obviously, and Vara's saying, our unit doesn't exist. That means I don't work for you. And then, therefore, they were able to do these secret missions, like getting this information on Dreykov and his men, which probably led to the attack on Dreykov, which is coming up, by the way. We'll see. But yeah, so Vara and Fury had a secret relationship, but also the Skrulls were secret. And that's why Hydra didn't know about them when they got into S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files. All right, so then 1999, Mark is harassed by his mother on his 12th birthday. So again, you can really build out this chronology from each of his birthdays. And his mother, again, evil. And he's punished, and that is when he forms the Stephen Grant persona. Obviously, he's been punished multiple times, but this is when he's punished even harder. And yeah, boom, out comes the Stephen Grant persona. All right, so then we also have 1999. That's when Wanda and Pietro's parents are killed. And they're sitting there after the Stark bomb goes off. And, well, it doesn't go off, right? Sorry. If it went off, they would be dead. It didn't go off, and they sit there watching it. And, of course, the TV was on as well. Wow, that was wild. So we get this flashback from, obviously, WandaVision. All right. Then we also have 1999, Shang-Chi is born. Hold off on why we picked 1999. It will all come into play because they do a really good job with Shang-Chi's age. But trust me, he was born in 1999, and we'll come back to that. Also in 1999, busy year in flashbacks. That's when Tony meets Maya, Yensing, and Killian. So we learn it's in 1999 in Switzerland. There he's meeting Maya. Of course, there's Happy hanging out also. He meets Yensing and who, of course, he'll meet again in the first Iron Man movie. And good old Killian. And poor Killian. They had to add in the closed captioning that he's stuttering. So they made him as nerdy as humanly possible. But anyway, that's when Tony meets all three of them. Very important time in Iron Man 3 and its storyline. All right, so 2004. That's when R.J. Nakajima is killed by the Winter Soldier. So how did we get 2004? Well, this is really clever. So what the wiki does is it takes the age of the actor that's killed, the age of Mr. Nakajima in present day during the Winter Soldier, the average age when Japanese families have children, and they do the math, and they come up with 2004. Wow. There's a lot of work to get this date. Again, you may not agree with it. You may not agree with their logic, but the goal here is just to get it on the timeline somewhere using as much logic as possible. Hopefully the timeline book will canonize all of this, but for now, I applaud the effort the wiki went to try to come up with the best possible placement. All right, then we have Bruce Banner becoming the Hulk. This is a flashback from The Incredible Hulk. So why do we pick 2005? Well, because they pretty much say in the movie, he's made it 5 years and got across borders without making mistakes. So Ross has been chasing him for 5 years, meaning presumably his origin was 5 years ago. Also, the timeline that I mentioned a while back canonizes this because notice it says Bruce Banner is bombarded with gamma radiation and changes into the Hulk, and it was 5 years BIM, so 5 years before Iron Man, Tony Stark rather said, "I am Iron Man." So it's 5 years also mainly before the Incredible Hulk movie. Now, why did they make it 5 years before? My theory is the first movie, the Hulk movie, and the Incredible Hulk movie were 5 years apart when they came out, 2003 and 2008. So I'm guessing Universal was trying to tie the two movies together. I'm pretty sure from a canonization standpoint, Marvel punted on that long ago and said the movie on the left, the original Hulk movie, that is not canon. I think maybe that Eric Bana Hulk might show up in Secret Wars as part of the multiverse, but it's not canon. But anyway, I think that's, for the record, why they came up with the 5 years. But basically, that flashback is 5 years before the present day in the Incredible Hulk movie. All right, then we have 2006, Yang Li being killed. Okay, why do we know this? Well, we learned that Shang-Chi's dad trained him to be an assassin when he was 7. Okay, but how do we know he was 7 in 2006? Hold on. Trust me, we'll get to it. It'll all come together in a second. Okay, this is really cool. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, placing the Rocket's flashbacks. I love it. Now, the wiki has not published this yet, but BEJT, one of the members on there, has done a ton of research. So let me talk about what you're looking at here. On the left, James Gunn published an Instagram post where he showed the 6 stages of Rocket. Notice a little, on the far, far left, a little itty-bitty dinky Rocket, then a little older, and then present day. So it's being theorized that James Gunn did that because there are 5 total flashbacks in Guardians 3. And then, of course, on the far right is what Rocket looked like in present-day Guardians 3. Okay, so you take that. Then you take the average life expectancy of a raccoon. So notice in captivity, at least, where it's better fed and protected from predators, it can live up to 20 years old. Now, remember how with Asgardians, the wiki basically figures out what's the average age of a raccoon, and then what's the average age of a human to convert raccoon years into human years. So they did the same thing with Asgardians. Of course, we do that again with dogs. So then you take that there was a Facebook Live, a video, which I wish I would show it to you, but closed captioning wasn't on. So I can't show you the quote, but trust me, James Gunn says that in Guardians 1, Rocket was the equivalent of late 20s, so call it 28. Okay, that's enough to do all this math, that if you figure out how to convert human years to raccoon years, and you do the math backwards from Guardians 1, which was in 2014, you get 7 years previous, which is when this first flashback happened. Whew! Did you follow all that? Because it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So the bottom line is there's little dinky Rocket, which remember, look at him there. That's the little dinky Rocket on the far left in the image. So this first flashback is early 2007. Then the next flashback we see is when he's being experimented upon. And of course, the High Evolutionary is saying, stitch him up and transfer him in with the rest of batch 89. And that's kind of important because that's going to keep coming up, this batch number. Okay, so then we see poor Rocket, the results of having been experimented upon. And this is part of, again, flashback number 2. All right, so we're going to set Rocket aside for just a second to jump over to Maya Lopez, because this is now where her flashback fits in, where she meets her uncle. They tell us, basically, 2007. So great. And, of course, she's learning karate and meets her creepy uncle. Creepy Uncle Kingpin. Yeah, he is bad news. So I'm really looking forward to Echo. I don't know if it'll be good or not. I've heard some people say it isn't, but I got hope. Because I really liked the Echo character, and we're going to get to see Daredevil and Kingpin again. So looking forward to it. All right, so back to Rocket. Now we're to the flashback where he's playing with his friends, which was really cool. He hasn't grown up too much at this point. This is flashback basically number 3. And finally, we jump to flashback number 4. Now, in flashback number 4, we see he's learning. The High Evolutionary is teaching him. And, of course, he's so advanced mentally that he's able to learn really quickly. And here's something interesting. The High Evolutionary says, we're halfway there, aren't we? So we're halfway through his training. So this is in later October, and they're halfway there. So kind of keep that in mind. All right. Also, during this same flashback, the High Evolutionary kind of asked Rocket for a little he's not even asking for help. He's trying to figure out what's going wrong, and he's kind of venting. But Rocket, of course, solves the issue with batch 90. So this is the batch following Rocket's batch. And, of course, Rocket solves it, and High Evolutionary gets kind of ticked, to be honest. Then back in his cage again, Rocket's dreaming with his friends. Okay, so that is the end of flashback number 4. Now we move over to Black Widow. So we have Black Widow's infamous Budapest operation, which again, we learned in Secret Invasion, information about Dreykov, the Skrulls, Vara, found for Fury. And again, that probably led to being able to do this Budapest operation. Very cool. So how do we know it's 2008? Of course, there's Dreykov's daughter in the window. How do we know it's 2008? Well, there's a deleted scene. Doggone it, Marvel, stop deleting scenes with timeline clues. But anyway, in a deleted scene, they get lost in an alleyway and trapped. And basically, Yelena is saying, you drove us into a cage. But Natasha says the gate wasn't here 8 years ago. So the Black Widow movie in 2016, subtract 8 years from that, 2008. So awesome. That places this one. Now back to the final flashback. Now, the wiki hasn't decided for sure when they're going to place this. I'm placing it in late 2008 because of a couple things. We're on batch 92 now. So batch 90 was destroyed at the end of the last flashback, and they've already gone through 91, and now they're into 92 when they get this breakthrough. Also, I would think this would be after all of Rocket's training was done. And remember, he said we're halfway through your training. So all that put together, I'm landing on 2008. The wiki might make it a little bit later. I'm going to wait and see where they place it before I make a final decision, but this seems like 2008. And remember, basically Rocket learns, hey, you guys were never meant for the new world. Batch 89, you're all going to be killed, and we're going to take your brain and study it. And that's when Rocket realizes they're going to kill us all in the morning, and he escapes. So that's the final flashback, which again, I think is 2008. Now, what's interesting is, again, he was late 20s in Guardians 1. If you continue to advance that forward, in Raccoon years, he would be pretty old in 2026 when Guardians 3 happens. So there's a theory the wiki's going with that part of the experimentation slowed his aging. Not a ton, because he is aging each time, but he would be like 70 in human years by Guardians 3. So he didn't look 70. Maybe in 50, but not 70. So anyway, all some interesting stuff. It'd be very interesting to see if the timeline book goes into this, but I don't think so, because I don't think they're going to cover Guardians 3. That's part of Phase 5. So it may be a long time before we get an official answer from Marvel. So I kind of like this theory. Let me know what you think. It was a lot of fun taking all these theories and putting it all together. And again, huge thanks to BEJT for his research. Okay. How about the flashbacks of Janet in the quantum realm? This one's really interesting. So 2009, right? You say, why are we saying 2009? Well, first of all, in the movie, she says, but after so many years alone, it was nice to have a friend. So we know that it was a while that she was in the quantum realm before Kang got shot in there. But we get this quote where Peyton Reed, sometimes his quotes, yikes. But we're going to go with this. He says in Empire Magazine, announcing early on that this was going to be a very different tone for the Ant-Man movies, we designated this idea, or designed, this idea that somewhere, say 21, 22 years into Janet's 30 years down there, she'd given up hope, right? Okay, 22 years, she went down in 1987, that would put us in 2009. I think that works, because it's clear that she was down there a long time before Kang arrived. Great. Then, of course, we get this flashback in Far From Home to learn that William Ginter Riva was working for, originally, Iron Man for Stane, and then now, and was yelled at because, Tony Stark fixed everything with a box of scraps. But yeah, it was a really cool flashback to tie in way back to the very first movie into Far From Home. So yeah, this flashback fits in 2009. Then Iron Man 2 has flashbacks to Iron Man 1 when Whiplash's father dies and plots his revenge. I say back to Iron Man 1 because they're on TV. That's Tony Stark basically saying, I am Iron Man. And then you see Venko with his dad. So this is flashbacks in Iron Man 2 to Iron Man, the end of Iron Man 1 and what was happening there in Russia. All right, then we have 2012. This is when Kate Bishop is watching Hawkeye during the Battle of New York, and we learn this in the Hawkeye flashbacks, obviously 2012. And really cool, you see her looking out the window and seeing the Stark Tower and the battle. And then in this shot, it's from the other perspective. You kind of have to focus a little bit on this, but you got Kate there, and that's Hawkeye's arm and the arrow shaft. So very, very cool. I love how all that was tied in. All right, now we're going to go back again to Endgame and put in, they aren't flashbacks, like I said before, but they do give you some idea of what was going on during 2012. In particular, the Ancient One helping with the Battle of New York, that is cool. Who saw that coming, right? So here we see her fighting off the Shatari. Very, very cool. I love that they tied that in. That was epic. Also, we learn how the strike team takes Loki's scepter. And that this is how they got it to begin with, which is really cool. Because we got the 2012 Black Widow saying, so who gets the magic wand? And the who is the strike team. It was really cool to see them reappear. And this, of course, explained how Hydra got a hold of the scepter. Because then Sitwell's saying, we're en route to Dr. Lisk. So he's taking the scepter to Lisk. And that's, of course, how Lisk is going to be able to experiment on Wanda and Pietro, which is a flashback we're going to see in a moment. We also learn that Pierce wanted both Loki and the Tesseract. Now, he's not going to get either one of them, but he wanted both because he says, may I ask you where you're going? He wants them to turn the prisoner over to me. Of course, the prisoner being Loki. Well, that ain't going to happen because we saw, obviously, in the beginning of Thor the Dark World that Loki and the Tesseract went back to Asgard. But it was interesting that Pierce showed up wanting them. So I'd kind of like to see the rest of this scene to learn how it all ended. I mean, we know from the scene that Thor says, you ain't getting Loki, but it'd be interesting to see why they didn't give him the Tesseract. Because he says that's been S.H.I.E.L.D. property for over 70 years, which is true. It has been. So yeah, very interesting. I'd like a little more about this. I'd like to know a little more about how Pierce ended up losing, because he has quite a group of people with him there. All right, so then we also have a flashback to around the same time when Damage Control takes over cleanup of New York. And this is, of course, from Homecoming. And there we see poor Adrian Toomes being told, hit the road, buddy. And, of course, they said in this movie it was 8 years ago with that terrible 8 years earlier graphic, the worst timeline mistake in the entire history of the MCU. I'm not even going to show that graphic because it's wrong. But anyway, yeah, this takes place right after the Battle of New York. And poor Adrian Toomes gets sent home with, well, a box of scraps. All right, so then soon after the battle in New York, Fury and Vara's relationship deepens because we see in a flashback in Secret Invasion to 2012 where they're meeting together and she says, I was watching all the news coverage of those guys, heroics in the States, and the strangest thing, I kept having this feeling that someone I know had something to do with getting them all together. So that's pretty cool. It also showed that Fury never even told the Skrulls, his Skrull team, about forming the Avengers. So, wow. Lots of secrets. And of course, it's where their relationship really deepened as they shared their favorite poem, to call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on this earth. So from this point forward, it's pretty clear their relationship, and they got married and moved into the house, etc. So very, very cool. All right. Also around this time frame, Scott Lang, quote-unquote, redistributes Visa Corp's wealth. Why do we know this? Well, this footage actually is from a WHIH newscast, but obviously Scott Lang got out of prison in 2015 from a 3-year sentence. So that would mean 3 years before, in 2012, is when he actually did the redistribution of wealth. So very cool. Then, this is kind of funny. In Ant-Man and the Wasp, Luis basically does effectively a flashback with his hilarious stories that go on way too detailed. But so in 2018, he's telling a story about how Scott meets his cellmate, who ends up being Luis. He says, because when I first met Scotty, he was in a bad place. His wife had just filed for divorce, which, stop for a second, that's interesting. So that means 2012 is when Maggie filed for the divorce. Very interesting, right? And then he says, and I was like, dang, homie, she dumped you when you're in lockup? that wig. Oh my word, that wig. So anyway, very interesting. Ant-Man and the Wasp's crazy story still did give us some nice continuity with this flashback to learn that he met him right off the bat. So very cool. A friendship that lasted forever. Okay, then I don't think the wiki agrees with this placement, so I just want to stress that because anytime I deviate from the wiki, I just want to mention it. It feels to me like it has been a while that they've been working on this thing. I think the wiki places it just a few years after, maybe even a year after. To me, I like 3 years after because she said it took ages, but we did it. We rebuilt it. It took ages. So to me, that's a little while. But the bottom line is we don't know. We don't know how long they've been working on it. We know 2009 because they said 22 years into her time there. I'm guessing a couple years go by and then she fixes it. Then, of course, she says she sabotages the machine and she's on the run from him until 2018. And she says, I spent years fighting him, running from him, hiding from him. Who knows what years is again? I'm guessing 6 years. But let me know what you think in the comments, if you agree with this particular placement of when she sabotaged the machine and how long it was then before she got out. Okay, so then this is kind of interesting. So in 2012, the main events of Iron Man 3 occur. Why am I saying that's a flashback? Well, because the entire movie, as you can see down below, let's track this from the beginning, that's Tony Stark telling the story to a very sleepy Bruce who falls asleep. Are you with me? Oh, yeah, sorry. So, yeah, that's in 2013, early 2013. He retells the entire story of Iron Man. So, for the record, all of Iron Man 3 is technically a flashback. Kind of funny. And then the main part of the story, if you will, is actually in 2013. All right, wild. Okay, also in 2013, thanks to the Endgame time heist, we learn a little bit more about what Jane Foster was up to because they go back to Asgard, of course, to get the ether out of her. And so, in fact, as my understanding is, these scenes were actually deleted scenes, so they didn't even film any new stuff with Natalie Portman for Endgame. So kind of wild, but we get to see some of the scenes that didn't make it into Thor: The Dark World. And again, I'm saying that this is basically continuity because they went back in time and it split from the main timeline. So these scenes would have been what really would have happened, other than Rocket taking the ether from her. That didn't happen in the main timeline. All right, so then we mentioned Dr. List. Remember, he got the scepter back in 2012. We saw that. Now here he is in 2014 experimenting on Wanda with the Mind Stone. Very cool. And of course, we see the vision of the Scarlet Witch in her eyes, foreshadowing that, yes, she will indeed ultimately become the Scarlet Witch. Okay, finally, we're going to get to the point where we can place everything with Shang-Chi. I know it feels like forever ago, but 2014, Shang-Chi is turned into a killer before leaving. He says, by the time I was 14, I could barely remember what life was like before she died, meaning his mom. So why are we saying he's 14 years old in 2014? Because then, finally, in present day, Wenwu is saying, I gave you 10 years to live your life. So in 2014, this is happening. So backtrack all that, right? And you can get all the way back to 1999 when he was born. And when he was 7 in 2006, and he was 14, then in 2014, and finally present day in 2024. I love it. They did a real good job with his age and the chronology, and it fits all perfectly. So kudos to the writer and director of Shang-Chi. Okay, I'm going to put months in some of these now because we're getting so close to present day that it's a little easier to throw in months. But so another thing from the time heist, we actually learned what Gamora and Nebula were doing immediately prior to Guardians 1. Because, remember, this is basically happening in the time heist. They go and steal the Power Stone, knock out Star-Lord before he gets to it. So we learn, and I just find this fascinating, that both Gamora and Nebula are talking about Father's plan is finally in motion. And if he gets all of them, and she's cut off because Thanos is about to walk in, which I'm going to get to in a second. But yeah, it's very interesting they're discussing this, especially since they hate each other. They were just previously even fighting each other, but they both know this is probably not a good idea for him to get the stones. So very interesting. Then Thanos comes in and he says, Ronan's located the Power Stone, of course, there on Morag. And he says, I'm dispatching you to his ship. So that's why we learn now why Nebula and Gamora both show up on Ronan's ship. Very, very cool. So, yeah, love it. All right. Also, we do get to see the Red Skull on Vormir. And why am I saying August? Because that's August is when Guardians 1 takes place, by the way. Okay, so, basically he's warning, in this case, both Natasha and Clint, hey, it's not going to be easy to get this stone. So why am I mentioning this? I mean, we obviously knew Red Skull was there for a while. I mean, probably ever since the Captain America movie, poor dude. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting that chronologically in MCU Timeline, Natasha and Clint went earlier than the time frame because it was 2018 when Thanos and Gamora went to meet the Red Skull. But again, the time heist was in an alternate timeline. I firmly believe it. But anyway, so here's the Red Skull in August of 2014. All right, so then we jump to February 2015 when Mark Spector is saved by Khonshu, which is a flashback from Moon Knight. Why are we saying that's February 2015? Of course, there he is, becoming Moon Knight. Well, because we learn from their backstory that it's been 10 years since Lila and Mark met. So it was 10 years ago when all this happened. So you give it a little bit of time for traveling to and from the States to Egypt, and you get February of 2015. So very cool. So this was 10 years before the main part of Moon Knight. All right. This one, I know this looks complicated, but it's just so much simpler to do this. This is Thor and Jane's dating from Thor Love and Thunder. And I'm going to explain why I'm breaking this into pieces. But so I'm just condensing January of 2014, so right after Thor the Dark World, which is November of 2013, all the way up to March of 2015. Here's what they did on their dates. And you can see the months under each, but you see them eating their pancakes together, boxing each other, rollerblading, playing skill games, watching a scary movie. We know the hot dog costumes would have been a Halloween, so that's October of 2014. The next day is when Thor tells Mjolnir to protect Jane. A beautiful scene. Then we see Thor seeing a little baby in the window and kind of wondering about family, but also probably thinking about Jane's mortality. We see them watching a movie together, and Thor still seems a little distressed. I think he's still thinking about, he's going to lose Jane eventually. They have an awkward dinner there in January of 2015. And then at a later dinner, Nick Fury calls Thor away. And in March of 2015, we see Jane giving a lecture in a college. Now, the exact dates of most of these are just guesses. What the wiki did is just dispersed it over this time frame. However, we know the dating started after Thor the Dark World, and this college presentation does seem to make sense in March of 2015. Why? Okay, this is really cool. Because, and now we're going to go from April to July of 2015, and we're going to see all the recognition Jane got for her work. Notice she's in Modern Physics, she's in the World Journal. In Age of Ultron, which happens in April to May of 2015, Thor is saying, he starts by saying, I don't even know what country she's in. He says her work on the convergence has made her the world's foremost astronomer, and there's even talk about her getting a Nobel Prize. And there's a news ticker in July of 2015. I just got the bottom of it down here so you can see it. From WHIH News that says renowned astrophysicist Jane Foster to lecture on her experiences with inner space. Wow. So Jane really got busy and really got famous around this time frame. So that all fits. She did that college lecture in March of 2015 that we saw earlier, and now she's appearing in all the magazines. She's up for a Nobel Prize. She's speaking around the world, etc. Meanwhile, after Age of Ultron, what happens? Well, Thor takes off to go look for the stones. And WHIH World News confirms this because notice on June 1st of 2015, it's been 3 days since the end of Age of Ultron. And they're saying, where is Thor gone? So nobody knows. Now, here's my guess. A couple things happened after this point with their relationship. Thor took off and was gone for a while. I can't believe he would just come back to Earth, right after realizing there's Infinity Stones out there that's going to destroy all of reality, basically, and they're a threat to reality. So if Thanos gets them. So I think he spent a while searching. So we're going to come back to Thor in a moment, but he's off searching. Meanwhile, Jane's not missing their relationship because she is so busy. She is all over the place. So this kind of really, really fits. Okay, so we're going to set their relationship aside for the minute. We move over to Wanda mourning Pietro and bonding with Vision. This is a flashback from WandaVision, but it takes place right after Age of Ultron, as they're kind of just tiptoeing in with their relationship. All right, then, this is fun. July of 2015, which was when the Ant-Man movie came out, we get another one of Luis's overly detailed and unnecessarily long stories. And in this one is where we learn about the safe that Hank Pym has, but not before getting way too much information. I was at a wine tasting with my cousin Ernesto, and, well, he talks about one of his early dates. Completely unnecessary information, as Ant-Man says. Not needed, move on. But anyway, eventually he does get to, this guy's got this big safe, just sitting in the basement, just chilling. So, yeah, very cool. So this is actually a flashback, even though it's a silly story. It's a flashback to how they learned about the safe, which is very important to the movie. So, yeah, well worth including as a critical flashback. Thank you, Luis. Okay, then we also have May of 2016, so a year later. This is when Quentin Beck is watching Tony deliver and reveal the information on his barf tech. So this flashback to 1991, right, is what he's doing with the barf. But this flashback is from Far From Home, when Quentin Beck is like, dude, you're kidding me. A, you called it barf, and B, you're just using it to do, psychotherapy. This is so much more it could be used for. So yeah, this flashback is from Far From Home and fits here in May of 2016. Okay, then, as promised, now we pick up with the rest of Thor and Jane's breakup. So I want to start down in the lower right-hand corner. I believe that Thor Love and Thunder takes place, the main part of the movie, when they realize, each other and they see each other, is in May of 2025. If you don't agree with that, because many people think it's in 2024, May, that's fine. Move all these dates a year earlier. I still think this logic works, but nonetheless, I think it's in May of 2025. So let's talk about that. He says it was 8 years, 7 months, and 6 days ago. So you back that up from May of 2025, you get October of 2016, or again, October of 2015, if you prefer. That's when Thor got the note. So from there, I think what happened is, again, Thor was gone for a long time. He left in June of 2015 and was gone for a year because he has to be gone during Civil War. Because remember they said, does anyone know where Thor is? And they all went, no, we don't know. Because Ross was really mad. They didn't know where Thor or the Hulk was. So I think he comes back finally after Civil War, tries to get their relationship going again, and as you can see, fails. He's leaving constantly whenever they get more info on the Infinity Stones and leads. Jane is then gone and misses the pancake the special reunion they had. And finally, then in October of 2016, she writes a note, and that's when he reads it. So I think this all fits perfectly. But again, move it back a year earlier if that's not when you think Love and Thunder happens. All right, very cool. Very cool stuff. All right, then we move to January of 2018. When Bucky tests to see if he's cured from the brainwashing. We got this flashback in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, it's interesting. I did a video just a couple days ago about post-credit scenes, and we learned that it was in late 2016 that Bucky came out of carbon freezing. So that does make you wonder, why then was he there another year and a half? My guess is, while Shuri removed whatever was in his brain synapses that was causing all the triggering, that doesn't mean he healed from it. That doesn't mean that he felt cured from it. He may still have had post-traumatic stress. He may have still even been triggered by the words, even though he was quote-unquote cured. So bottom line is, this flashback makes it clear he was in Wakanda all the way to January of 2018. And more, really. We see in Infinity War he was still there. So, very interesting, right? To try to put that post-credit scene with this flashback. But anyway, January 2018, we know this one for sure. Okay, then we move to, let's call them a sequence of blips. We have May of 2018, which they give us 2018, where Yelena is blipped. And boom. That was emotional too. And then we have Hawkeye's family being blipped. You can see his daughter blipped there by the bullseye. And then, of course, we have the Midtown High students blipped. So we get several examples of blippage going on. All right, so then we have in June of 2021 where Ronan kills Maya's dad. So why June of 2021? Well, we learn in Hawkeye, when he's talking to Kazi, he says, look, you've been working under William Lopez as a lieutenant for what, 4 years? And now under Maya for a few more years. So the real important part there is under Maya, because obviously he was working under Maya because her dad was killed. So we know that it's a few more years. And of course, Hawkeye takes place in December of 2024. So yeah, June of 2021 works. Also, it's important there's a newscast saying this is the first potential sighting of Ronan in years. So it seems like it wasn't just 1 year or 2 years. It's got to be at least 3 years. And so, yeah, that's why the wiki places it in June of 2021. I think that makes a lot of sense. It is also interesting to note, though, the newscast says potential sighting of Ronan in years. Well, not necessarily, because obviously he was sighted in Endgame in 2023. So I'm imagining the newscaster meant in the U.S. In fact, maybe people didn't even know what he was doing when Natasha caught up with him in Endgame. But anyway, it's just interesting to take what that newscaster said and try to place it with what we know happened in Endgame. Okay, so then we have the returns, all the returns from the blip. Yelena's, that was really cool. Monica's, that was really intense. And of course, those Midtown High students coming back in the middle of a basketball game there. Craziness. Okay, then we have the flashbacks from WandaVision, where we learn that in early October, right after the blip, Wanda goes to see Vision's body and is distressed to see what happened to it. Obviously, in her distress, she creates the blip. She creates the blip. Of course she does. She creates the hex. So in her distress, she creates the hex in Westview. Then we also learn in the flashbacks that Monica returned to Sword and then finally went over to Westview. And of course, when she goes to Westview, she meets Jimmy Woo. So all of these are flashbacks bringing us up to speed with what happened prior to the beginning of WandaVision. Then we have May of 2024. That's when T'Challa passes away. And we know that it's May of 2024 because it's 1 year later from present day. And present day, as I've shown in all the different timeline videos, is May of 2025. So the death of T'Challa is in May of 2024. All right. This you could argue isn't really worth including because it's a pretty simple flashback, but it's actually really important. So first of all, I put Eternals in 2024 because I just think that makes sense. I've done videos on how I think the blip impacted society enough that I don't believe this movie could have taken place until October 2024. But hey, if you think it's 2023, as many people do, that's fine. Back this up a year. It's all good. But the thing I want to point out is, whenever you place the movie, 6 days prior, that's when Ajak and Ikaris met. And Ajak was basically saying in 7 days will be the emergence. So there's been some question of whether, was there a lot of time between the present day in the movie and this discussion? No, not a lot of time. 6 days, because the emergence then happened the next day. So yeah, very, very important flashback. Small flashback, but very important. All right, so then we get the flashback to Jennifer Walters becoming the She-Hulk. And right now the wiki has that placed in January to February 2025 because she says it's a few months ago, a few months from present day in the series, which present day, by the way, by the time you get to episode 2 is in May. So a few months ago would be January to February of 2025. And of course, she learns about spandex. Spandex is your friend. Then we move to Gore. It seems pretty clear from the movie that Gore started his god hunting, god butchering, very soon within the time of the present day of the movie, which we'll get to that in a second. But so the wiki backdates it to February. Now, again, if you think Love and Thunder happens in 2024, that's fine. Put February of 2024 then. But the key is, either way, the wiki says Gore takes his vow, all gods will die in February of whatever year you place it. Okay, also very important, February 2025, right before the Moon Knight show, is when Mark avoids his mother Shiva. He just couldn't handle it, and Steven takes over. So that's when the Mark personality is buried, if you will, and Steven takes over. How do we know that? Well, because Mark says this is it. Mom's death and Shiva was 2 months ago. So you got that. And then also Layla says, I've been texting you for months, which maybe that, it's at least 2 months. And so if not 2.5 or so. So that puts us firmly in February of 2025. So right before the Moon Knight series, these flashbacks happen. All right. Now, back to Love and Thunder. It's very clear that whatever year you place it in, that Jane looks at this blood test in April, right? April 30th. So I think the main part of the movie is in May. But you might say, well, why are you calling this a flashback then? Hold on to that thought. But so the main part of the movie, the team up with the Guardians and such, is in May of whatever year you place it. And of course, here we are now, finally up to that meeting with Jane where they do the 8 years, 7 months, and 6 days line. And I think this is also a flashback. I know this sounds crazy, but hang with me, of meeting Eternity and even Love and Thunder jumping into action, which is a few months after that. Why do I say all that? Because I think the placement for Love and Thunder is based on when Korg is retelling the entire story. I think he's telling the story in, say, October, so just a month afterwards. And of course, if you think of the entire story of Thor, Love and Thunder as being retold by Korg, that also explains why it's a little sillier at points than maybe it really was in the actual movie. It kind of makes me feel a lot better about the movie to think that some of it didn't really happen that way. That's just how Korg perceived it or improvised it for his story. But anyway, I believe that's the placement of the actual movie is in October, in my case 2025, but 2024 if you will. And so therefore the entire movie is a flashback. It's kind of like Iron Man 3, kind of wild. All right, so there you go. We are up to present day. That is all of the flashbacks. I do have a spreadsheet on my Google Drive that has everything. Notice, flashback, flashback. They're all there in order. And there's some cool things you can do. So right now, it's sorted in timeline order. But if you don't like timeline order and you want to watch things in release order, that's fine. You can sort it by release order. And this is one of the cool benefits you get. Notice, look at Guardians of the Galaxy 2 there. By sorting in release order, you get all of the entries for it. So it came out in May of 2027. That's the release order. But now you can see the 5 flashbacks, when the movie takes place, and then even the post-credit scene. So if you look under the timeline portion, you can see 80 million BC, 1978, 80, 87, 89, 2014 for the main movie, and then 2018 for the post-credit scene. So really cool. And obviously, if you want to filter things out, you can, because you can build a filter and you can say, I don't want to see flashbacks, or I don't want to see Hulu stuff. But for the fun of it, if you only do flashbacks, that's where you can see that there's actually 130, because I added one more, but 130 flashbacks. Craziness. So anyway, that is out there on the Google Drive. You can check it out, and you can download it. You can edit it, change it around, whatever you want to do. So that's out there. Also, don't forget, we have the contest. Be a subscriber, like the video, and you can enter. And lastly, we do have the Discord server. Here we are talking about the timeline and the box of scraps. And I will put a link in the pinned comment so you can join the server if you'd like. We'd love to have you there. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we can all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.